A whisper can outlive a man. That whisper travels not on wind, but through wires, across oceans, across time, until it becomes a roar too late to save the one who spoke it. In the dim hush of an English winter night, the world remained blind to a spark that would one day banish the dark. A man sat alone in his attic laboratory in the north of England, not surrounded by applause, but by silence. No cameras, no crowd, just a quiet, pale glow pulsing from a hand-blown ball, the first of its kind. That man was not Edison. His name was Joseph Swan, and the world forgot him. The invention we wrap in fame and textbooks was born not in the opulence of American industry, but in the soft, sooty breath of a modest chemist, lit by oil lamp and driven by obsession. Long before Edison's name turned electric, Swan had already walked the lonely path of sleepless nights and scorched filaments. He had written the formula in the margins of notebooks no one would read, in handwriting too small for history to notice. And when he finally succeeded, when he brought artificial light to life, the world blinked and looked away. Edison's bulb arrived later, louder, surrounded by lawyers and journalists. And just like that, the light that Joseph Swan first nurtured became the symbol of another man's legacy. What does it do to a soul to see the world change by your hand, but feel the credits slip through your fingers like ash? And more chilling, what if Swan never cared for glory at all, only to realize that in this world, silence buries more men than failure ever could? As we sit beneath fluorescent ceilings and LED halos, how many of us remember the hand that first defied the dark, not for profit, not for fame, but for wonder? Or are we all just living in the glow of someone else's? Theft? The year was 1873, and England wore a mask of progress stitched with coal smoke and candlelight. The streets of Sunderland reeked of industry iron against stone, soot upon brick. Horse-drawn carts creaked over damp cobbles as gas lamps hissed dimly through the fog. Inside drawing rooms, families sat hunched beneath flickering flames, shadows climbing walls like silent ghosts. There was comfort in the dark, perhaps because it was all they had ever known. Light was a privilege, a luxury, found only in wealthier boroughs or in the fragile dance of firelight. And yet, hidden within the soft decay of this Victorian gloom, something ancient stirred in a new way, human defiance. Electricity, once the mysterious plaything of natural philosophers, was whispering into the ears of men like Swan. At first, it spoke in sparks and failures. It sang in short circuits and burn marks. But in that time, before the roar of the modern age, it was still a secret language. Science had not yet exploded into commerce. Ideas still lived and died in quiet workshops, not in corporate boardrooms. The world, though roaring with machines and ambition, still teetered on the edge of nightfall. Across the Atlantic, America flexed its growing muscles. Men like Edison gathered power not just through invention, but through charisma, wealth, and spectacle. But here in the north of England, far from Parliament and industry titans, a quiet man listened to that same electric whisper and answered not with noise, but with purpose. While society hailed coal and gas as kings, Swan saw their decay, felt it in the heavy air, smelled it in the lungs of children coughing through chimney smoke. He envisioned something cleaner, something permanent. He imagined light not as fire, but as energy captured, controlled, sustained. And as the gas lamps flickered in the alleys and parlors of England, the world remained unaware that its entire future was about to shift, not in the laboratories of London or the showrooms of New York, but in the attic of a modest chemist who refused to let the dark define his time. Joseph Wilson Swan was not born with fame in his cradle, nor did the stars lean in to bless his name. He came into the world in 1828, in Sunderland, a place as gray and forgotten as the back pages of history. His childhood was not marked by grandeur, but by quiet curiosity, a boy who lingered longer than others beneath the candle's glow, eyes transfixed not on the flame, but on the way it danced, the way it consumed. He was a child of questions, and while other boys raced down muddy lanes or chased dreams of empire, Joseph remained indoors, dismantling clocks, mixing powders, watching the world through glass tubes and beakers. There was no one to guide him, no mentor to say, "This is what genius looks like." He simply knew. He knew when light struck a surface at a certain angle, it could be bent, split, or tamed. He knew that some force flowed unseen through wires, and that it could do more than shock or amuse. It could illuminate. By 16, he was apprenticed to a local druggist, but his mind never stayed within bottles. It wandered toward chemistry, optics, electricity fields, still in their infancy. He read late into the night, by gaslight or moonlight or whatever glow he could steal. The world was still dark, but inside him something burned. Years passed, and Joseph eventually took a position at Mawson's chemical firm in Newcastle. Modest job to most, but to him, a key. The lab became his sanctuary. Chemicals became his language. And it was there, among rows of jars and soot-stained glass, that Swan began to chase a vision no one else could see, a world where night was no longer master. While others sought fortune or reputation, Swan craved illumination, pure, endless, silent light. Not a flicker, not a flame, but a steady star captured inside glass. That was his dream. And in the stillness of forgotten corners, where failure was common and praise was rare, he began to build it. One broken filament at a time, one quiet miracle after another. The world does not often welcome visionaries. It tolerates them, ridicules them, and only after their silence rewrites their names into myths. Joseph Swan, for all his brilliance, found that even the softest light could cast a long and dangerous shadow. As he refined his glowing creation, he stepped cautiously into the arena of public discourse, hoping to share what he had built with trembling hands and sleepless eyes. He wrote to journals, presented to small societies, and invited peers to witness the phenomenon. A vacuum-sealed bulb, glowing not with flame, but with electric life. Yet the response was not reverence, it was doubt, smirks, and empty praise laced with condescension. The Royal Society barely acknowledged him. Patrons turned away, unconvinced that such a quiet man from the industrial north could grasp what the great minds of London and Paris had not. In their eyes, he was not a genius, just another hobbyist chasing illusions in a dusty lab. The lantern fool, they called him in hushed jokes behind cigar smoke and academic doors. Even his colleagues at Mawson's grew uncomfortable with his obsession. He had become, to them, eccentric, more inventor than chemist, more distraction and contributor. When he reached out to potential collaborators, he was met with vague encouragement followed by silence. When he filed his early patents, they were buried under bureaucracy and technicalities. No one wanted to believe that the future could emerge from such an unremarkable man. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Edison was beginning to stir. With an army of assistants, well-oiled publicity machines, and a hunger not just for invention, but for empire, Edison loomed like a storm Swan could not see coming. Still, Joseph persisted. He did not fight with lawyers or shout in courts. He simply returned to his dim laboratory, rewired the filaments, tested carbonized paper, and etched his results quietly into the pages of a notebook that the world would not read. But behind each test failure, each mocking glance, Swan's resolve hardened. His fingers shook, his eyes blurred, but the dream had become a vow. Even as his peers turned away, and his light sputtered in the shadows of ridicule, he kept walking toward an idea he knew was real. Swan was not chasing applause. He was building something eternal. But he had not yet realized that light, once created, can be stolen. And history, once written, rarely corrects its mistakes. It happened on a cold evening in 1878, when the air inside the Newcastle Lecture Hall carried the heavy silence of doubt. The room was packed with skeptics, scientists, industrialists, men who had come not to be amazed, but to be amused. They had read the whispers in local papers, the murmurs about some chemist from the north who claimed he had done the impossible. Artificial light, sustained and pure? It was a fantasy, a trick at best. Swan stood behind a modest wooden table, his face pale under the dim glow of the gas lamps above, his hands trembling not with fear, but with exhaustion. Before him sat a single fragile bulb, hand-blown, wired to a small power source. He took a breath that held years of failure, ridicule, and darkness. Then he threw the switch. The room gasped. The bulb flared to life, steady and golden, casting a soft halo over the faces of doubters turned still. There was no flame, no smoke, just light stable, silent, unwavering. For the first time, darkness had been replaced without combustion. The applause did not come immediately, but something deeper filled the room. Awe. For a fleeting moment, Joseph Swan stood not as a chemist, but as a prophet. That night, the local papers hailed it a marvel. A handful of engineers, eyes gleaming, with imagination, reached out to collaborate. He had done it. He had captured the sun in glass. But as Swan moved to secure a proper patent, tragedy arrived, not with a bang, but with a whisper from across the sea. In America, Thomas Edison had just announced the same invention, publicly, grandly, loudly. His team had worked in secrecy, and their ball, while technically inferior in its early form, was wrapped in showmanship, backed by capital, and wielded with the fury of a man who wanted not just to invent the light bulb, but to own it. Edison's legal team began filing claims contesting Swan's rights, positioning Edison as the sole inventor in the minds of the world. Within months, headlines declared Edison the father of electric light. Swan watched this unfold in quiet disbelief. His bulb had shined. First, his process was documented. His public demonstrations were on record. But facts do not matter when the story has already chosen its hero. And history, like electricity, follows the path of least resistance. Swan's discovery had finally bloomed, but someone else had already wrapped it in chains that it began not with. A thunderclap, but with silence and erosion so subtle that Swan barely noticed it at first. Letters that once arrived with curiosity now went unanswered. The newspaper editorials that had praised his glowing invention stopped printing his name. Invitations to speak dwindled. The scientific societies that once asked him to demonstrate his bulb now busied themselves with Edison's publicists and patent announcements. Swan was not forgotten overnight, but piece by piece, like a man fading from a photograph. Then came the lawsuit. Edison, armed with moneyed lawyers and patent muscle, filed aggressively, arguing that Swan's invention infringed upon his design even though Swan had demonstrated his bulb publicly before Edison's patent had even been finalized. The details did not matter. What mattered was force. Edison's name was growing too large to fail. He had allies in American courts, financial backers ready to pour oil on the fire, and newspapers willing to tell whichever version of the story sold best. Swan, weary from years of work and without the stomach for courtroom war, was cornered into a bitter compromise. The Edison and Swan United Electric Light Company was formed not a true partnership, but a legal merger in name only, where Edison's legacy would tower and Swan's name would quietly dissolve. In brochures and textbooks, the Edison lamp shone brighter. In speeches and schoolrooms, children were taught to revere the Wizard of Menlo Park, and Swan, who who had worked alone in the chill of his attic, who had lit the first steady bulb before. Edison's team had even stabilized theirs, was left to watch the world bask in light born from his silence. He returned to his laboratory, but something inside him had dimmed. His journal entries grew sparse, and the ink began to wobble lines that once danced with innovation now simply documented routine. His hands, once precise and trembling with wonder, grew still. There were no more lectures, no more headlines. Friends in his scientific circle moved on to new fascinations, and Swan, though still a man of ideas, found the world no longer listened. It was not failure that undid him, it was erasure. And there is nothing crueler than to see your dream take flight, only to have the wings named after another man. By the end of the decade, Swan's name was a footnote, and the fire that had once burned so fiercely within him flickered low. It is said he often walked past lamp-lit streets in silence, watching the glow stretch out across cities he helped illuminate, never once correcting the passers-by who called them Edison's lights. It would take decades before the dust was disturbed. Long after the streetlights of England had all been claimed in Edison's name, long after textbooks had crystallized the narrative into a single, clean lie, someone opened an old cedar trunk in a forgotten study, its hinges creaking like the voice of history itself. Inside were notebooks, brittle with age and smudged with the fingerprints of a man no longer here to defend himself. Joseph Swan's handwriting spilled across yellowed pages, dense and meticulous. Diagrams, voltage measurements, carbon filament. Tests all dated, all detailed. Here, in ink and paper, was the undeniable truth. He had succeeded first. A journal entry dated December 18, 1878, described a sustained electric glow using a vacuum and carbonized filament months before Edison filed his American patent. There were sketches, test results, notes on bulb longevity, and chemical breakdowns. They had never been published widely, not because they lacked substance, but because no one cared to look. Swan's daughter, who had grown up in the quiet glow of her father's experiments, wept as she flipped through them. To her, these weren't just documents. They were his voice's quiet resistance against being forgotten. Word spread slowly. Some British engineers and historians took notice. A few scientific circles in Europe began to murmur. But still, no public reckoning came. Edison's myth was too big, too embedded in the machinery of American pride and educational canon. Yet those who read Swan's notes felt a cold realization. The man had never wanted glory. He had only wanted the truth to shine. And in that truth, buried in an attic, in the handwriting of a man who once turned night into day, was the quiet proof of something terrible. History had lied. The more they read, the more unsettling the story became. Swan had not only lit the bulb first, he had documented every failure, every adjustment, every victory. And yet, he never fought back. Not really. Perhaps he believed light did not need a name. Perhaps he underestimated the world's hunger to attach greatness to the loudest voice. But now, as these pages surfaced, the silence that buried him began to hum again, like an old circuit flickering to life. The truth, long suppressed, was beginning to glow. Dimly, yes. But undeniably. Joseph Swan died quietly on May 27, 1914, in a world lit by his invention, but not by his name. There were no grand parades, no speeches carved into stone, no nations pausing to honor the man who first tamed electric light. The newspapers mentioned his passing in brief columns, inventor of photographic paper dyes. Some noted, while others vaguely referred to him as a contributor to electric lighting. The word pioneer was used sparingly, almost reluctantly. History had already picked its victor. Swan, even in his final years, never seemed bitter, though his eyes held a sadness only those erased from their own legacy can understand. In his last days, he rarely spoke of Edison. He spoke of chemistry, of light spectra, of the color blue in glasswork. He still tinkered with lenses and filaments, but not to prove anything, only because it was who he was. One evening, with the spring wind rattling the shutters of his Newcastle home, he asked for the light to be dimmed. He wanted to watch the shadows stretch across the walls, just as they had when he was a boy imagining the impossible. He died shortly after, his breath fading beneath the faint flicker of an electric bulb, a bulb born from a principle he had discovered, refined, and shared. But the bulb bore another's name. His son sat beside him, gripping a hand that once shaped the future, and Joseph's last words slipped into the room like a prayer not meant for ears. Let it shine, even if they forget me. Outside, the street lamps buzzed to life one by one, Edison's name engraved in every socket, every pattern, every lesson taught to children who would never know the man who built the first light in a world that preferred the sound of thunder over the truth of quiet fire. Swan's grave would not become a shrine. There would be no pilgrimage to honor the man who gave humanity the power to chase away darkness. But somewhere, deep inside every glowing filament, his silence still lingers, warm, steady, and waiting to be seen. Today, we live in a world sculpted by light ceiling bulbs hum in sterile offices. Street lamps cast halos over midnight pavement, and neon signs bleed color into the night. We do not question it. We flick a switch, and the sun obeys. We scroll through glowing screens long after the stars fade behind smog and skyscrapers. But beneath that convenience lies a truth too inconvenient for history books. The world runs on the mind of a man it chose not to remember. Joseph Swan's early vacuum-sealed filaments became the skeleton of modern lighting. His carbonization techniques informed not just incandescent bulbs, but the evolution into halogen, fluorescent, and LED design. His methods influenced early cinema projection, photography exposure, and even NASA's earliest module illumination systems. British Parliament lit its halls with his designs before Edison ever filed. Yet ask any student, any teacher, any trivia game, who invented the light? Bulb? The answer echoes across the globe, loud and unchallenged Edison. It is more marketable, more American, easier. Swan's name is now a footnote in British engineering lectures, a quiet acknowledgement on plaques few will read. Meanwhile, billion-dollar corporations owe their roots to his unseen hands. Even the legal partnership he was forced into, Edison and Swan United, was designed to bury his name in corporate fog, an alliance where Edison's legacy bloomed and Swan's withered beneath it. That is the cruelest kind of theft, the one where the world does not just take your work, but thanks someone else for it. In an age obsessed with origin stories and technological heroes, Joseph Swan remains the invisible thread woven into everything. Luminous, the tragedy is not that his invention was stolen. The tragedy is that the world has thrived in his brilliance while forgetting he ever existed. Somewhere in a quiet graveyard in the north of England, a stone lies weathered by rain and time. Few visit it. Fewer still read the name etched faintly into the surface. Joseph Wilson Swan. No museum gift shop sells his portrait. No child in a classroom is asked to remember the man who first lit the dark without flame. And yet, his legacy pulses on in silence. Every airport runway illuminated before dawn. Every late-night hospital corridor glowing with sterile light. Every home bathed in electricity that defies the night. All of it hums with the ghost of Swan's forgotten genius. The world is illuminated by the very thing it refused to see. History crowned a king, not for being first, but for being loudest. What does that say about us? That truth can be outshouted? That invention is not what you make, but what you claim. Somewhere, perhaps, Swan knew this would happen. Perhaps that is why he never fought. Perhaps he believed that light once born, belonged to everyone, not just the man whose name was stamped on the patent. But in that selfless silence, we lost something too. We lost a cautionary tale. We lost the real story. And maybe that is what should haunt us most. Not that Swan died in obscurity, but that we let it happen. We live our lives beneath artificial daylight and never once ask who lit it first. Maybe we are still afraid of what the answer might reveal. Not about Edison, not about Swan, but about ourselves. The screen goes black. A single bulb flickers, then fades.